This game. Flip the board. So this is advanced variation. Knight c6, knight f3, queen b6. So all of these are book moves. Bishop d3, and we take the pawn. That's correct. It's a mistake if we take the knight because there's a discover attack, and I think we should probably know that. So bishop d7, defending b5, and later we can move the rook to c8. That's good. Castle, take the pawn. Yeah, why not? So knight d2, and we move bishop to c6. So I think actually we can move the knight back to c6. So even though we retreat the knight from center, but if we look at the position between these two knights, so our knight is actually more active if that go back to c6 because it target at e5 pawn, and white has to defend the pawn. And if we put the knight at d4, that's actually a burden of the b6 queen. Our queen has to protect the knight. And even though we move bishop to c5, we still need a bishop to protect the knight. So yeah, after winning the pawn, we can put the knight back to c6. Bishop to c5, exchange knight f3. Yeah, so now we need to decide, should we move the bishop back or just keep it as it is? So yeah, that's tricky, and that slows down our piece development. Bishop c5 and b4. So actually a3 b4, I think that's better because it can kick the bishop back to e7, and once the bishop reaches e7, the knight cannot really move, so it will disrupt piece development of black. So a3 b4, or rook b1 b4, something like that. So b4, and I think black realized move bishop to back to e7, it's really bad. Back 4, it blocks the knight. And the question is, can we take the pawn? I think we still can. If rook b1, we can offer a trade. So even though rook reaches 7th rank, we can still, after trading the queen, we can still make the king safe. So for example, we can move knight to e7 and later knight to c6. So yeah, so or maybe bishop to c6, queen to c7. I can move king to d8 to trap the rook. So I mean, I think black can solve this threat on the queen side because white has moved so few pieces at the queen side so far. So we can offer a queen trade at the queen a4. And during this game, we move bishop back to d4. I think this makes our queen passive. So rook b1, that's correct. White avoid trading the bishop, just keeping it as a center, as a burden. So knight e7 and b5. I don't quite get the meaning of this move. So yeah, what about a4, a5? Kick the queen. And how can we deal with the bishop? That's a big problem. b5, bishop back to c5, h4. White is expanding its space, the king side. The signal is very clear. White is going to attack on the king side. Maybe h5, h4, h6 to force our pawn either taking the h6 or pushing up. And our dark square will be very weak once the g7 pawn moved. Bishop knight to g6. Well, this move is not good because after h5, I mean, the intention is quite clear. White is pushing the pawn, h pawn, and it's not hard to see. I mean, in upcoming moves, white will push the h pawn. So knight to h6 after h5 will move knight back again. So that's not good. So I feel like we can either castle to make it the king to the king side, or I mean it's still safe, leave the king at the center. We can probably move the rook to control the c file. The c file is what we should utilize in French defense. This is the only open file, and black should attack on the queen side. Yeah, knight back, bishop d3. Well, if the queen moves to a4 and then to g4, our g7 pawn will be attacked. Bishop d2, I think white is moving the rook to the queen side, to the c file. h6. Well, what about g4, g5? So we push the pawn and it makes the pawn break easier. So white didn't push the pawn. Okay, white is going to attack the c file. This is what I said after bishop d2. I think white is going to move the rook to come to the c file. Bishop to c8. Maybe we want to push the pawn to a6. I think right now we are quite passive. Yeah, if we can move the rook to c file at early stage, for example here. So before the bishop moves to d2, hopefully we can control the c file, right? So rook to c8, castle, and so where can we move the bishop? Okay, yeah, so this two pieces are a little awkward, to be honest. It's really hard to move the bishop, and it's really hard to move the knight. So maybe this is... Okay, I see. I have a plan. After castle, we can move this rook, and later knight at g6, and then knight f6. I mean, I'm not saying castling right now, because bishop h7, there is a Greek sacrifice, and white can attack us. Yeah, maybe still move this rook. Or can we long castle? It looks crazy, but maybe we can move the rook to c file. But yeah, bishop d2, a4, a5. That's annoying if the king at the queen side. So yeah, it's tricky. Rook to ca, and then we see what will happen. Or maybe d4. Then we have a space for the knight. And then we probably move the bishop to e7. And also knight to d5, knight can reach c3. Yeah, this is something we could consider. So rook to c1, b6, a4, our bishop is pinned, this is annoying. Let me push the f pawn. It's a little risky. Knight d4, the pawn is under attack. a5. Bishop d4 blocking the d pawn. Yeah, this is really annoying. I think, as I said, I see the intention now. We want to move the bishop to b7 and d4 move the knight out to d5. But the white play bishop to d4. That's a really good move. Take. I think we have to take, otherwise we'll lose a pawn. But knight d4, this is maybe an even worse position after trading the rooks. White can attack the king side, f4, f5. It's really hard for us to deal with the attack on the queen king side. If we take the pawn, and knight f5, and what can we do? Knight e7, offer a trade, knight h6, and queen h6. We cannot really defend. Okay, if knight goes here, and check, rook f7. Yeah, white is winning. So if the f pawn reaches to f5, this is super hard to defend. If we don't do anything, the pawn will keep pushing. Our bishop, and look at the d4 knight. It sits at a really good square. Our bishop is dead, and our knight is at a very bad position. So yeah, so if white realizes f4 is the best move, white is going to win. Knight c6, castle. I think we can exchange first. I mean, our bishop is in a really awkward position, so we should trade with that. And even though we cannot take the pawn because rook to c1 and then bishop to b5 will lose pieces, we can move queen to c7. And since it's a dog square, white doesn't have a dog square bishop, white doesn't have a knight, so we can, hopefully we can have a draw. So if we have a draw, I'm happy with that. It's an acceptable outcome. But if we don't trade with the knight, and once white realizes it can push the f pawn, that would be a problem. And like this. So knight go back to d4. f4, yeah. I think white realized it's really hard to occupy the c file. Because black has a really great pawn at d5, which means black has great control at some spaces, or has very great like expansion on the queen side. So it's really hard for white to fight at the queen side, even though the bishop is bad in the position, but it still controls 2 squares. But once white attack the king side, these pieces are really hard to move, to be maneuvered to the king side. Okay. Bishop to b1. What is the purpose of this? Why don't we just push the pawns? So we force a trade, that's good. Taking with the pawn, that's good. That's better than taking it with the queen. So hopefully we can, first of all we have 2 connected pawns at center, and hopefully we can move the knight to b6. And also with this pawn, kicking the knight, we can push d4. Then our bishop is free. Okay, queen to d3, white is placing the knight. It doesn't want to leave. Knight f4. I think we can take that. I mean, even though white will win the knight back, I think, first of all, if we turn the game into endgame, I think it's still playable. It's quite equalized. Even though we have up 1 pawn, the pawn will be captured. It's really hard to protect d4. But I think it's still playable. It's drawish, you see. But we play something instead. We play knight f5. So after all the trade, if we compare to this position, the position we showed earlier, if we look at this one. Yeah, this is the bishop endings I was showing earlier. Black has up 1 pawn. Even though white has pawn at higher position, I mean it's still drawish. But with knight f5, it actually make our endings, make our endgame like favoring white. Because now white have this very great pawn structure. And the bishop is more active than say staying at the GA, and this move is really like scary. So we should, I think we should, no, this will lose the pawn probably. c4, bishop to ca, can push the pawn. So bishop cannot move to b7 because we can push c2, and bishop has to go back. d4, king f2. We move the king here, and then we can win g2. Maybe g3 first. Yeah. So yeah, I mean these 2 pawns will be captured. So we are in a challenging position, but if we push the pawn, hopefully we can still get a draw. But if we don't do that, if we don't push the pawn, bishop c8 and b7 will be losing. Yeah, like just as it is. Yeah, we lose the bishop, and we're losing. Okay, so I think the critical time for this, I think first of all, if we move the knight back to c6, we will not have the awkward bishop later on we saw in this game. So first of all, we need to move the knight back. So even though we heard that a knight at center is better than a knight at, for example, c6, But still, we need to think about after moving the knight, the e5 pawn is under attack. And I think the d4 knight will be traded sooner or later. So we should avoid the trade. Knight c6. And another thing make us in the worst position is I think we should take the pawn. And bishop back to d4 makes the position even worse because our queen has to protect the bishop. It's a burden. And from now on, white has built up a better position than us. And of course, when the game was turning to endgame, so yeah, I think we should take the d4 knight. Instead of move knight f4, f5, it involves some calculation between the two choices. And that's it.